So the next we move on to the lightning talks is John Christoph in the room. John is our first presenter. John will be presenting on unwanted traffic removal service.
First, I should say thank you to the program committee for welcoming me and actually having me go first, so I'm not the one pressing up against beer and gear. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and friends and colleagues for coming. This is a service that we're actually somewhat re-implementing that I hope will at least attract some discussion and pique your interest, if not actually cooperation or participation. So I'd like your feedback on whether you find it interesting or not, regardless. So everyone, I'm going to assume, because I don't have much time to go over it, has an understanding of what remote trigger black hole is. So you have a customer typically with a peer relationship with an upstream ISP. They signal the upstream ISP to say we don't want traffic to this particular address or prefix, and so that traffic stops before it gets onto the link of the customer. And so that works great, and that's nice, and that's been used for a very long time with great success. I should point out that this particular scenario is a relationship between one we'll call edge customer and the customer's upstream ISP or some peer of some sort. And so there's a particular problem here, or a potential problem in certain cases. So while this works often and many times, if there's a particular sort of attack that is overwhelming or so severe that upstream ISP cannot deal with on its own, this isn't going to necessarily do all that much good. So this leads us to a conclusion that what we're missing is something else that's bigger than this, something that's more coordinated. It would be nice if it was automated, and something very quick to deploy across a wider range of autonomous systems. So when the traditional approaches of a denial of service attack, if you have something that you cannot deal with yourself, there's phone calls that are involved, mailing list posts to get other people involved to help out. So that takes a significant amount of time. So what can we do to make that a little bit better? Well, perhaps we extend the idea of remote trigger black hole to the community. So we have a remote trigger black hole server that many ASs can then peer to. And this isn't necessarily a new idea, but it's a project that we've somewhat attempted before, and other people have tried to do a similar sort of thing. But people have asked us about this again recently, and so we said, okay, we'll give it a try. We'll see if we can get people to do this. So we have this basically remote trigger black hole server that you can peer with, and it's just getting started, so we have maybe 15 or 20 peers today. And the idea is that someone injects a prefix into this, and it gets distributed to all the other participants, who then block the traffic closer to their edge, at least, of the network. And so if there is enough networks participating in this, in theory, you can block a significant attack on a very distributed basis. So I'm not going to read all the bullet points of this, but I'll cover a few things. You can find this slide deck on NANOG's webpage. You can search for me and Team Cumry, and you'll find a more detailed fact about all this sorts of stuff. But today we're just doing IPv4/32s, route announcements. We can do flow spec. People have asked us about, wouldn't it be nice if we could do flow spec? So we said, okay. In fact, we could do it. We use software called ExaBGP, which supports flow spec. We've actually tried flow spec before, and we literally got no interest in people actually setting up peering sessions with flow spec. So we're not actually doing flow spec today, but if enough people say, please enable flow spec for these kinds of routes, then we'll turn it on. Here's what it looks like on our side, a peering config. It looks like a Juniper config. There's nothing really fancy about this. The one thing I'll point out towards the end, there's a block for static routes. This is where the announcements would go. There'd be a bunch of /32s in there potentially. It's currently empty. It will hopefully usually be empty. So traditionally, on a regular basis, there won't be that many attacks going on. So that would normally be a very limited list, if not empty. So this allows us to scale too, which is potentially nice. one of the couple things I'll mention about the properties, again, I won't read each bullet point here, but we are requiring TCP MD5 for sessions since this is multi-hop. Sorry, Patrick, but we will be requiring that. The config on our side is essentially flexible, really flexible, except for our peering address. We can't just use any old peering address, but otherwise we can configure the session as you want. Our ASN we can change, your ASN we could do essentially whatever we want, although we'd want to use your assigned ASN. But we can set community tags and all that sort of stuff. It's very easy for us to do all that. So we only announced /32s, IPv4. We're not doing v6 right now. We could, there's nothing to prevent us from doing that, but that hasn't been asked of us to do yet. So until the time comes, we're just doing that. It's currently a manual process, and this is the piece that may change depending on the reaction to this project by all of you. If this project is somewhat successful, and if we get to the point of 100 people expressing interest or peering with us in this project within 30 days, we'll say, we'll claim this as a success, and we're going to develop or extend the software exabgp to do some automated things. When we receive an announcement, then we can actually pass it on, so it's not an out-of-band manual vetting process for that route. So right now, it's if there's an attack, someone has to manually contact us via email or phone call, and we'll apply the route. The only person who can apply or submit a prefix is the originator of a block covering that /32. So I couldn't make a decision to say, look, I don't really like Google today, I'm going to just decide Google DNS is no good and block 8.8.8.8/32. That's not the way the system's designed. It's the only people who are allowed to inject routes into this are effectively the victims and those who have a relationship with us, and we vetted them, and they then tell us that they have a prefix that they want to announce. When we get to the automated process, the current thinking is that, and this is open to discussion, or if you have ideas, is we'll simply look at the historicity of the route prefix itself for the route that you're announcing. And if we see that you've been originating this route for some period of time, and this code hasn't been written yet, but say 30 days, and you're the only one who's been originating this prefix, well, okay, maybe that's good enough. And then we'll accept that route. If there's something that looks a little odd, like if there's multiple origins, maybe we'll flag it, and then it gets punted to a manual process. So that's our current thing of how we would do it. And we don't think we want to go down the route of like route servers. And if there was RPKI, that might work, of course, but then it might not, because we're not the originators of this route. So although if we pass it on with the original AS, maybe that'll work. So it remains to be seen exactly how this will be implemented, but I think it'll probably be based off route history. If you have anything specific to say about how that should work, I'd certainly like to hear about it. It'll also go out via out-of-band alerts and so forth. We've talked about maybe delaying the announcements or providing the ability for someone to get a delayed announcement so they're not necessarily the first to get it. If they're very cautious about getting routes first and don't want to be caught between a rock and a hard place if something gets messed up. All of you probably recognize this. This remote trigger black hole finishes an attack. I think you all understand that. There's not much we can do about that. That is the intent. It's a sacrificial lamb. If we don't like this, then something like FlowSpec may be the approach that we ought to take. So we, like I said, we have about 15, 20 people using it now. We're only allowing people to participate in this project if you have an assigned ASM. So some people have come to us with a block of addresses that have maybe been swiped to them or they've been allocated. And if they're not participating in routing, we're just saying, well, no, we can't take you at this time. Maybe we could do something else in the future, but we're only taking BGP speakers effectively. If we don't get 100 peers within about 30 or 60 days, we're just going to cancel this project. So I would like to know, even if you're not sure you would want to do this, but if you have any interest in this could work, or you say, maybe I'll run a test lab, do tell me, and that will at least keep us working on it. But if you don't, tell me that too, and tell me this is a stupid idea and this is ridiculous and I would never do this. I can take it, send me that. I'd like to know that also. I don't want to waste my time on it if no one's going to do it. So I wouldn't disclose who's using it today. If you were participating, you would get to learn that. But it's a smattering of people. There's some small networks, some small hosting providers, just some educational institutions, and there's a couple of simply large ISPs who are participating in this as well. And there's a couple who are interested and very cautious, understandably, and probably waiting to see what other people do. So there will be certain people who just won't do this, and we're okay with that. We don't expect all ASs to participate in this, but we'll see if we can get a few of them to do it. So there's a few things left to do. There's some code to potentially write if we continue this project. The most important thing for me is to take myself out of this picture, because if you send an email to our web form to sign up for this, I'm processing all of that stuff. If you want to get a route injected into this, it'll be me taking care of it, and I need to come out of that picture. We have a 24/7 NOC, and so they should be doing that, not me. There's been some other ideas. We have an internet exchange protection service and our Bogon feed, and should we put those routes in this so you can also run those routes along with the service? And we said, okay, well, maybe you could do that as well, but all these things are on the drawing board. So I'll let you look at this page and the pages on our website, and I hope you will go at least send me an email to tell me whether you're interested or not, or this is a terrible idea. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. I don't think we have much time for questions, but
We'll skip questions. No, we'll skip questions. We will skip questions. We're too tight on time. Thank you very much, John. Our next presenter is John Curran on IANA government changes.
Okay, I'm John Curran. I'm the president and CEO of ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers. I have 10 slides, 10 minutes, but I'm going to allow time for questions, so this is going to be very brief. This is an introduction to a topic that we're going to be discussing at Friday in more length, so think of this as the teaser. I just want you folks to know this is going on. You might be interested, you might not be interested, frankly, but it's definitely a pretty significant change that's of importance to the community. It's about the IANA. So what we're facing now is we're facing the fact that the IANA, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, the organization that has handled keeping track of names, numbers, and protocols and parameter numbers throughout the history of the Internet, is undergoing a change. And basically, presently, the IANA operates under two different documents. One is a contract with the U.S. government, and that contract is the IANA Functions Contract. It is provided for with NTIA, the Department of Commerce. NTIA, National Telecommunications and Infrastructure Agency, has a contract with ICANN for ICANN to provide these IANA registry services. The registry services are keeping track of a small number of tables that we don't really use in real time, but are very important for coordination. So, for example, the DNS root zone is one of those tables. The IPv4, IPv6, and ASN free pools, both 32 and 64, are IANA tables that are being maintained. Actually, DNS and IP are the smaller number of tables. Amazingly, there's about 1,000 IETF parameter tables. So this is everything from BGP options to MIME types to every time a new RFC comes out, it has an IANA consideration section. These are the people that maintain the table and put it on the IANA website, make it available as XML, et cetera, et cetera. So in some ways, this is a critical function because it prevents us from stomping on each other. It makes sure that we know that port 80 is for one thing and port 25 is for something else. But in another way, it's offline, meaning once you know what you're going to code on port 80 or 443 or 25, or once you know where you're going to get the DNS root zone from, it's not very important as long as it's there and reliable. Okay, so the US government has been in one form or another contracting for this service over many, many years. The IETF since 2000 has also had a contract. I actually say the IETF has had an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which calls for the IANA to provide, the ICANN team to provide certain IANA services as well. People read these documents and some people say they overlap 100%, some people say they overlap 25%, but they're both out there. One is RFC 2860 and one is on the ICANN and NTIA website. So the IANA does its job in internet coordination for all of us because of these two relationships. The US government earlier this year announced it wants to transition the oversight of the IANA functions contract from NTIA to the global multi-stakeholder community. Now, US government NTIA is a very well-defined organization, but the global multi-stakeholder community is not. And transitioning oversight is a very interesting thing. When you issue a contract, you own the contract and you put oversight mechanisms, SLA, escalation, things like that. But a community is not an easy thing to do a contract. So it was kind of hard trying to figure out what the US government actually wanted to have happen, other than the fact that it wasn't contracting for these services. Okay, so what they basically said, NTIA said, they want to support and enhance the multi-stakeholder model. They want to maintain the security, stability, and resiliency of the internet DNS. They want to meet the needs and expectations of the global customers and partners for IANA services, such as the regional registries, the IETF, and ICANN. We're all customers and partners in this. They want to maintain the openness of the internet. The US government said that they want to be out of the game of being the one providing this unique oversight. Now, there's a nice thing about having the US government. They're fairly predictable in these things. For example, I do not know of any case where they've gotten involved in either an IETF protocol parameter situation or an RIR IP address situation where they've given IANA contradictory guidance than what the community has come up with. So in some ways, they're a nice stabilizing force. If you're outside the US and you look at the US government, you might say, well, they're stabilizing, but every now and then they do something pretty surreal. They decide unilaterally to take action. And so globally, this stabilizing influence isn't as popular as it might be from people within the US, and that's probably one of the drivers behind this. The US government also said, we want a proposal from the global community, but it can't be government-based. We do not want no governmental organization or intergovernmental organization need apply. As a response to this, the IETF, ICANN, the RIRs, the various constituencies within ICANN, like the SAC, the RSAC, which is the Stability Organization, the Root Server Organization, the GAC, the Government Advisory Organization, formed a IANA Stewardship Transition Coordination Group. About 30 people who are meeting now monthly to try to figure out what did the NTIA ask for and how are we going to generate one. Goal, to coordinate the development of a proposal among communities affected by the IANA functions. Charter is online. That chart shows what they envision happening. If you had an amusement park ride that followed that little dotted line, you would get sick. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a proposal that they coordinate and then go back to the community and check in with them, and we're going to refine it, and then we're going to go back to the coordination group, and there's going to be multiple iterations. There's a magic date. September 2015 is when the IANA contract between NTIA and ICANN is up. That's it. So we really have to deliver something before then if we don't want them to renew the contract, or we have to tell them, hey, renew for a year or two while we're working on this. Each of the RIRs has kicked off a process on how it's going to collect input to go into this plan of how to provide oversight to the IANA function. And so you can see all the pages for each of the RIRs. In the Iron region, we're going to be talking about this at length on Friday, but you can go to the webpage to see what we're looking at. The RIRs need to come together to come up with one proposal, which needs to be synchronized with the IETF and the ICANN community to come up with one overall proposal. It's going to be a lot of fun. And we're going to discuss it at the upcoming RIR meetings. Effectively, what we're trying to do is figure out how to replace the function of contracting this that US NTIA does with a community-based function to provide the same effective role and effective oversight. So we still have an IANA performing, but instead of it answering to the US government NTIA, it answers to, quote, all of us. Questions, let's see. One of the things you need to think about here is this is the most important transition the internet's ever going to go through, and it is the least important transition the internet's ever going to go through. So from the least important perspective, folks, this doesn't matter. IETF, ICANN, and the RIRs know if the IANA does its job on a week-to-week basis. We have great working relationships with the IANA team. And there's already SLA reporting, for example, both in the contract and in the IETF process. So the ICANN is very accountable. And if anything were to go wrong, like they didn't update the ASN registry or they didn't update the DNS root zone, the parties that directly give them policy, the RIRs, ICANN, and the IETF, would quickly notice and be right on top of making it happen. So in that way, it's the least important transition. Really doesn't matter, because the customers who use the IANA are going to make sure this is fine. Now, it's the most important transition because right now, the ability for the US government to contract for this gives it the ability not to contract. If the IRs were to go into a ditch and collectively make a very bad decision contrary to the community, or if the IETF were to do something similar, or if ICANN were to do something similar, right now you would have the ability to go to the US government and go, this is all working fine except that, and because of that issue, whatever that is, do not renew the contract with IANA until, parentheses, ICANN, comma, IETF, comma, or RIRs get their act together and begin behaving like they're supposed to in an accountable manner to us. A coincidence of changing this function is you'll never have that ability to go to a party outside the system to complain that the system isn't working. So in that way, this could be very important. You want to make sure that all these entities are appropriately accountable to you before we actually get to the point of getting the US government out of the picture. Okay, questions, and I can take one if I read this clock correctly. Go. Any questions? There is actually going to be an hour-long session on Friday in the Aaron meeting. If I encourage you, if you don't happen to be attending Baltimore for the rest of the week, then I would recommend go online. You can participate remotely. We're going to have a lot of fun with this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, and I'm sure you will be available to discuss at the Beer and Gear, which starts in 5 minutes. So once again, a reminder to fill out the surveys, and we would ask you to be disciplined in emptying the room within the next 5 minutes, please, and the lobby right in front. Thank you.